Today, the committee meets to consider two critical nominations: Scott Kupor to be Director of the Office of Personnel Management and Eric Ueland to be Deputy Director of the Management at the Office of Management and Budget. These two positions are quite important to the functioning of our federal government. Together, they steer policy, hiring policy, benefits administration, performance metrics, and the size and scope of the civil service itself. The federal workforce has ballooned to over 2 million civilian employees, not including contractors, grantees, and uniformed military. This means that hundreds of thousands of bureaucrats writing rules, managing programs, and often dodging accountability, sheltered by a system that protects performance mediocrity and resists reform. Over the past few years, we've seen agencies like the IRS and CDC fail the American people in real time. And yet, what was Washington's answer? More funding, bigger payrolls, less accountability. It's not just bad policy, it's a complete misreading of the problem. You don't fix a broken machine by adding more broken parts. That's why this hearing matters. That's why it's important what we do here today. Together, I believe Mr. Ueland and Mr. Kupor will help President Trump achieve the goals of reducing federal bureaucracy and ensuring agencies are accountable to the taxpayers they serve. I look forward to supporting both of their nominations. At this time, I will now recognize the ranking member for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Today we are indeed considering nominees for two positions that are critical to the federal workforce. But before discussing these nominees, I must raise an issue that we have heard about the administration's use of unofficial messaging apps and non-government email addresses to discuss official and highly sensitive information related to this nation's security. This committee has jurisdiction over the federal government cybersecurity as well as federal records retention laws. And Mr. Chairman, I hope that we are able to have a hearing on this important issue. We're going to be talking later this afternoon, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman will be talking this afternoon, and I hope that we can raise the issue about having a hearing on what we have seen. Now, turning to today's hearing, let me be clear. For the past 2.5 months, this administration has engaged in an unprecedented assault on federal workers across government. The Office of Management and Budget and the Office of Personnel Management, along with Elon Musk and DOGE, has been the center of the administration's reckless approach to eliminating programs as well as personnel. OMB and OPM have led efforts to indiscriminately fire tens of thousands of probationary employees, including long-time public servants who were recently promoted due to their exemplary performance. The administration has engaged in mass firings without any analysis of the impact to services and programs communities across our nation rely on. This includes eliminating entire offices dedicated to fighting infectious diseases, ensuring the safety of infant formula, technology modernization, public transparency, and civil rights. Just last week, the President unilaterally stripped longstanding collective bargaining rights from 1.5 million workers across the federal government. These are not actions that will make government more efficient or more accountable. These are actions that will cause permanent damage to agencies and their ability to effectively serve the American people. Past administrations have pursued reforms, restructurings, and reductions in force aimed at saving taxpayer money and increasing efficiency. But what has been happening since January is the destruction just for the sake of destruction. Not only are some of these actions clearly chaotic and clearly senseless, but many of them have been found by the courts to be actually illegal. Mr. Kupor and Mr. Ueland, I appreciate meeting with each of you to discuss these concerns in my office. And while there is a lot we may disagree on, I believe that we share some of the same goals, including attracting and retaining top talent to serve in the federal workforce. I'm deeply concerned about how this administration's actions will undermine our ability to attract the best and the brightest to work in the federal government. Americans are watching as federal workers, some of who have dedicated their entire career to public service, find out that they are fired from a Friday night email, or when they show up to work and are turned away by security. People considering entering the civil service are hearing top officials in the administration demonize federal workers and promise to put them, quote, in trauma. Some of the most successful and innovative recruitment programs have been halted. This is not the way to attract the next generation of talented and dedicated public servants. I've repeatedly called on the administration to explain and justify their actions, but I have received no engagement from the current leadership at OMB or OPM, no information in response to oversight requests, no attempt to work with Congress on thoughtful bipartisan reforms. Mr. Ueland, you have been serving at OMB since January. I hope you will be transparent with us today and provide some answers about the administration's recent actions. Mr. Kupor, if confirmed, you will lead the agency responsible for driving personnel policy across the government. And I hope to hear from you today about how things will change under your leadership and how you will work with Congress and this committee to pursue reforms in a thoughtful and collaborative manner. And I look forward to having a productive discussion with both of you.
It's the practice of this committee to swear in witnesses. Mr. Kupor and Mr. Ueland, please rise and raise your right hand. Do you swear that the testimony you will give before this committee will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Scott Kupor has worked as an executive and an investor in the technology industry for nearly 30 years. He's a graduate of Stanford University and Stanford Law School. Mr. Kupor joined one of the earliest web hosting businesses in 2000, where he led a variety of operating functions leading up to the company's acquisition in 2007. In 2009, Mr. Kupor joined with Mark Andreessen and Ben Horowitz to start a new venture capital firm focusing on backing promising early-stage technology startups. He has invested in and sits on the boards of numerous healthcare technology startups and has written a seminal book on venture capital industry. Mr. Kupor, you are recognized for your opening statement.
Chairman Paul, Ranking Member Peters, and distinguished members of the Homeland Security and Government Affairs Committee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. I'd also like to thank President Trump for providing me this important opportunity to be a part of his administration. By way of brief introduction, I grew up in Houston, Texas, and have mostly lived in Northern California for the better part of 35 years. My wife Laura and I have been married for nearly 28 years and have been blessed with 3 amazing daughters, Ashley, Lexi, and Amanda. I spent nearly my entire professional career in the technology industry, first as an investment banker, and then as an operating executive in both a startup and a Fortune 500 company. For the past 15 years, I helped build one of the most successful venture capital firms, growing from 3 people in a single $300 million fund to more than 600 people and $45 billion in assets. Having spent my entire career in the private sector, you might rightly ask, why am I sitting here today and what do I bring to OPM? I'm here for 2 reasons that I believe fully align with the broader goals of the Trump administration. First, the U.S. is on an unsustainable fiscal path. We have $36 trillion in debt and compound that each year to the tune of approximately $2 trillion. Getting our fiscal house in order is not only necessary, but I believe it's a matter of fundamental fairness to the American people. It's simply unfair that ordinary Americans must find a way to live within their financial means, yet the government is free to spend as it wishes and pile up an insurmountable of debt on our America's children and grandchildren. If confirmed, I will work with the President, Congress, and the agencies to help right our financial footing. Every American knows that they can't afford to be all things to all people. It's time the federal government recognizes the same. Restructuring is no doubt hard, but we can and should do this in a way that is surgical, as President Trump has said, is transparent, and that respects the dignity and humanity of the hardworking members of the federal workforce. Second, just as the U.S. leads in many important industries, the federal workforce should also be the envy of the world, and not just in terms of efficiency. Rather, we should also enable committed federal employees to do their absolute best work every day on behalf of the American people, working in an environment that rewards innovation, measured risk-taking, and merit, versus one that rewards legacy, risk avoidance at all costs, and tenure. This, too, is a matter of fairness. Dedicated federal employees should not be hamstrung by an organizational system that prohibits them from best serving the American people. We can and we should do better. If confirmed, I will work with the President, with Congress, and with the agencies to design a talent recruitment, development, and management system that empowers federal employees to provide the very best services to all Americans, one in which innovative thinking and efficiency drive decision-making. And why am I the right person for the job? Yes, I come from the private sector, and yes, I recognize that the government is not the private sector. Rightly so, the government may have different goals and objectives that should inform our thinking. However, the fundamentals of organizational design are largely the same, whether in nonprofits, the government, or in the private sector. I've led numerous organizations from 5 to 10-person single office teams to a 1,300-person globally distributed $1 billion business. Through trial and error, I have learned the following principles that I believe pervade most organizations. First, everything starts and ends with objectives. I think we can all agree that the federal government should do two things. First, provide the best services to the American people. But two, do so while preserving and protecting the long-term viability, fiscal stability, and national security of our incredible country. Sustained excessive deficit spending violates these objectives. Second, incentives drive behavior. If we want high-quality services delivered efficiently, then we need a set of incentives, corresponding metrics, and a performance management system that rewards the desired behavior. A system that largely rewards tenure and where power is derived from who has the biggest budget and the largest headcount does not achieve that. Third, accountability matters. We have a broken performance management system, as evidenced by the fact that 69% of federal employees are ranked above average and 0.4% are ranked as below average. Other than in Lake Wobegon, this simply defies logic. More importantly, this system is unfair to federal employees who are in fact top performers. A players, rightly so, want to be surrounded by other A players. We owe that to them. Fourth, communication, leadership, and transparency matter. Great leaders rally team members around the mission, communicate not just the what, but also the why, and are transparent in their actions, whether popular or not. Particularly during restructurings, the remaining employees will judge their leaders based upon how well they manage this process. Getting this right is absolutely critical. If confirmed, my hope is simple, albeit ambitious. The federal government should be the shining beacon on which all great organizations are modeled. We should honor, reward, and enable those current hardworking, dedicated members of our team, and we should also attract the best and brightest from our universities, community college, and trade schools, and from the private sector. As a matter of fundamental fairness, every federal employee should be surrounded by other smart, hardworking people, have a manager who cares about and invests in their career development, be able to progress in their career and develop new skills, and be fairly rewarded for the value they create, and held accountable to the organization's overall objectives. As Americans, I believe we should demand no less. I thank you for your time and look forward to your questions.
Thank you. We're pleased this morning to be joined by former Senator Don Nichols, who will be doing an introduction for Eric Ueland. Mr. Nichols.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much, and Ranking Member Peters, thank you. I served on this committee many years ago. I'm not used to sitting on this side of the dais. But I've served on this committee many years ago. I have many fond memories of it, and I am delighted to be here to introduce my very good friend, Eric Ueland, that I had the pleasure of working with for many years. I've known Eric and his family, his wife, Kathleen, his kids, Stephen, Bridget, and Charlotte. Charlotte works in the Republican cloakroom, which I think is kind of special. I got to know Eric. I became policy committee chairman way back when, in 1991. I took Bill Armstrong's place, who was one of my mentors in the Senate, and he said, I've got several good people. One of the bright, shining stars in the policy committee was this young guy, Eric Ueland. And he was exactly right, and I was chairman of the committee for 6 years, and it didn't take long to realize we had a real shining star who was just a little bit smarter than anyone in the room. And he was invaluable to me. I became Republican whip after that. He was my chief of staff. After that, he's chief of staff to Senator Frist as Senate Majority Leader. He's chief of staff to Senator Enzi, as chairman of the Budget Committee. He's chief of staff to ranking member of the Budget Committee, Senator Sessions. He was chief of staff for a while for Senator Santorum. In other words, he rose to the top in any position in the Senate. And so he's eminently qualified, and he gets this because he's so smart. But he's also trustworthy, and he's truthful, and he listens. And Ranking Member Peters, he listens to Democrats as well as Republicans. I can tell you that. I've been in countless meetings, and I know that he was involved in countless continuing resolutions, appropriation bills, big bills, all kinds of legislation, and he was one of the individuals that could help make the Senate work and get the Senate's work done. He helped us navigate some real crisis in the Senate. 9/11, I remember it like yesterday. The anthrax attacks on Senator Daschle and others in the Senate. President Clinton's impeachment, those were perilous times. A time that we had 50-50 votes in the Senate. That was awkward. It was challenging. It was difficult. But Eric Ueland was one of the people that had the cool, the calm, the intelligence to help make things work, and he did it very well. You'll all be pleased to know, too, that he's helped you in your endeavors. You may be involved in a vote-a-rama in the not-too-distant future. I was budget chairman for a couple of years. Vote-a-ramas are not fun. I didn't like them. I wanted to reduce the time. Eric was responsible for banning amendments, basically since the Senate amendments. So you don't know this, but he's going to save you hours of time because that's still the rules today. He banned amendments that were purely precatory. No one that I knew of knew what that meant, but basically it bans sense of the Senate amendments. After his Senate tenure, which was extensive, he served in the first Trump administration as Deputy Director of Domestic Policy Council and also as Director of Legislative Affairs. He also did a little time in the State Department as Senior Official for Civilian Security, Democracy, and Human Rights, and also as Director of Office of Foreign Resources. Most recently, he was Commissioner and Vice Chairman of the U.S. Commission on International Freedom, a group that works with the State Department to confront threats to religious freedom around the world. They do outstanding work. That legislation passed with Senator Lieberman and myself. In other words, I think that Eric Ueland is immensely qualified. I think he'll do a fantastic job. You will have a person that knows the Senate, that knows the Congress, that knows the administration, that is honest and trustworthy, and will work tirelessly to do a good job for you, for our country. And I urge your support of him. I hope that he has a strong bipartisan vote. I know my colleagues, if Tom Daschle was here and others that I served with that worked with Eric, they would be supporting him as well. And that would include Harry Reid and others that, because we negotiated, we worked, we made the Senate work. I think Eric Ueland is a real gift to this country. I'm honored and pleased that he would give of his time to continue his public service, and I think the country will be better for it. And I thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Boy, Eric, you got a lot to live up to there. Mr. Ueland, you are recognized for your opening statement.
Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Peters, and Senators, thank you very much for holding this hearing this morning on our nominations. I very much appreciate the opportunity to appear before all of you today. This committee has a strong history, and I look forward to building on that if I have the privilege of confirmation as the Deputy Director for Management at the Office of Management and Budget. I also greatly appreciate the trust and honor President Trump placed in me with this nomination. Of course, none of us could serve without the support of our family, who endure a lot, and mine are here today as part of these proceedings. I owe them, and I thank them. As well, I am grateful for the introduction by a former boss and friend of mine, Don Nichols. It's just an incredible honor that he's here speaking on my behalf here this morning. Mr. Chairman, the Deputy Director for Management at OMB celebrates its 35th birthday this year. Created as a key official to support the best financial management of the federal books, the DDM over the years has become a go-to resource for a variety of tasks, including federal performance and improvement, e-governance and information policy, procurement and linking data to spending, and how best to provide service to the American public. Now, as a result of the presidential election, the Deputy Director for Management is positioned to assist and support departments and agencies as they drive change and bring long-needed reforms to the federal government. Under the direction of OMB's Director and Deputy Director, the DDM and its staff can be leaders in assessing and reforming the processes and operations that have made the federal government too large and too inefficient, while ensuring that the American people receive the government services they deserve and need. This cannot be done successfully without partnerships and communication. If I am confirmed, I will make it my mission to wear out this committee and any interested members in Congress to solicit input and share our course. I'm hopeful that we can find places to cooperate and collaborate to tackle the many challenges we all face together. And I will also make sure that as we clarify problems, think through solutions, and help agencies and departments build a more responsive federal government in the 21st century, we take every opportunity we can to find, to explain the problems we discover and the fixes that we propose. Any change is hard, but change with clarity to the workforce, to Congress, and to the public of what is at hand, the plans we have, and what we are implementing will reduce confusion and concern while driving better results that everyone has a stake in seeing succeed. The DDM works to ensure departments and agencies create the best policy and delivery of strong federal financial management through our Office of Federal Financial Management. We handle key aspects of federal procurement, including policy and delivery through the Office of Federal Procurement Policy. We work hard to help departments and agencies with their personnel management and performance evaluation through the Office of Performance and Personnel Management. We heighten cybersecurity and enhance the functionality of what the public expects through the Office of Federal Chief Information Officer. The DDM works hard to understand the data the federal government has and how it relates to the programs and projects the government and Congress funds. OMB is responsible for figuring out how oversized the federal real estate footprint is, how it is misaligned with taxpayer needs, and then right-sizing what we have, what we rent, and what we do. Under the direction of the director and the deputy director, it will be my job to ensure we meet our statutory responsibilities while pioneering new ways to deliver. Everywhere I've worked, I've tackled new challenges, mastered ways and tools to deliver results, collaborated closely with colleagues, built outstanding teams, and ultimately delivered success. I'm excited about the work we face and the chance to serve and learn as the Deputy Director of Management at OMB. I look forward to answering the questions you have and a strong partnership with this committee if I have the privilege of confirmation. Mr. Chairman, Senator Peters, thank you.
It's the standard practice of this committee for the chairman to ask the nominees the following question. Do you agree without reservation to comply with any request or summons to appear and testify before any duly constituted committee of Congress if you are confirmed? Mr. Kupor?
Yes.
Mr. Ueland?
I do.
I'll reserve the remainder of my time and at this time recognize Senator Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank both of you gentlemen for your willingness to serve your nation in this aspect. Mr. Kupor, you're obviously from the private sector, and the private sector has certain disciplines. You know, they have to balance the budget, they go bankrupt, and then everybody loses their job. But also, in general, it should be at will employment. The federal government doesn't have to balance its budget, which is why we're approaching $37 trillion in debt. And by and large, federal employees are immune from losing their job. So they don't show up for work and they expect they can still continue to be employed. So you want to just quick address the imbalance there and how that impacts the effectiveness of the federal government?
Yes, thank you, Senator. Look, I agree a foundational part of any organization ultimately is accountability, as you're talking about. And that requires managers, obviously, to provide feedback and to protect individuals But ultimately, I do think, we should look to a system where if people are performing, quite frankly, they should be rewarded and rewarded handsomely. And if people are not performing appropriately, then we need to find ways in which for them to find opportunities elsewhere.
Mr. Ueland, about 3 years ago, we were engaged in an omnibus spending debate, and I asked my colleagues, as well as the Washington Press Corps, anybody know how much we spent last year? Nobody answered. I did get one answer from the press. It was like over $1 trillion. Okay, that's discretionary spending, which is approximately 25% of total spending. The other 75% is mandatory, and we never look at it. We've gone from $4.4 trillion in 2019 to probably about $7.3 trillion this year. Completely out of control. 63% increase. Our population's growing 2.6%. I think you're well aware of the different pre-pandemic spending options I've laid on the table. What I want to talk about is a process for returning to a pre-pandemic level. We've never had a process to control federal spending. I wasn't aware of the fact that appropriation committees were initially established because of the authorizing committees were big spenders. Well, that didn't work. The Budget Act didn't work. Simpson-Bowles didn't work. The Budget Control Act did restrain just discretionary spending for a couple of years, but we weaseled around that. So, I proposed a bicameral panel, senators, House members working with OMB, to do something the private sector does all the time, a budget review meeting, and go through the 2,400 individual lines of expenditures and ask the administration to justify the spending. Compare that against, for example, fully inflated 2019 spending, or 2014 under Obama, or 1998 under Clinton. So again, you've got a lot of experience. You've seen to what extent the administration looks at the detail. We don't. Again, Congress doesn't even consider 75% of the budget, and I would argue the 25% we do is not done in a particularly professional manner. It's pretty much, well, what did we spend last year? We're going to increase it 2, 3, 4% and then pat ourselves on the back, I guess, when we don't increase it. While, by the way, we're sliding discretionary spending into other mandatory. We've gone from $642 billion in other mandatory, not Social Security, Medicare, or even Medicaid, $642 billion of other mandatory to $1.3 trillion this year. So again, with short time remaining, talk to me about how we can develop a process like the private sector to go line by line through the federal budget cooperatively, the administration with Congress, so that the end result is something we can all embrace.
I appreciate your question, Senator, and absolutely, we've discussed this before, and I know you've had a chance to discuss this both with the president and the director and the deputy director. As you know, OMB, under the director and deputy director, are going through this line-by-line evaluation against a rubric of the president's campaign commitments, but as well in working to engage with you and other members of the Senate and the House about where matters stand, potential alternatives, share information and ideas, ultimately, to your point, to ensure that to the maximum extent possible, we are as unified as possible on the budget path and trajectory going forward. To your point about the amount of money being spent, one of the challenges, as you know, that has oftentimes not been as easily noticed by the press is how much of that spending is obligatory interest payment on the federal debt, which is something, again, when you joined the Senate, was much lower, around $100 billion a year, and now is $1 trillion a year. It exceeds almost any other domestic discretionary aggregate big spends, including the Department of Defense and Labor and HHS. So we have a challenge for the $36 trillion of debt that we already owe, which isn't, by the way, as you know, better than most, not the full debt, just the public debt. The debt that we owe to ourselves, you add that on top, we're at nearly $45 trillion. And so being very methodical, very careful, very clear about where to go is something that I hope there is both ends of Pennsylvania Avenue's ability to engage and work through.
So I guess I'm just asking for a commitment to continue to work with us on developing a process that actually achieves a pre-pandemic level of spending. Will you do that?
Absolutely. Happy to commit to the process. And again, I know you've discussed directly with Director Vogt ideas about the best way to engage in that conversation.
Done. Thank you both. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Kupor, do you think that input from federal unions is important and valuable for developing federal personnel policy and providing guidance to other agencies on personnel management?
Look, I think input from any, party who's part of the labor force makes a lot of sense, yes.
So that is a yes for federal unions?
Yes.
How specifically do you plan to engage with federal unions coming into the role as the OMP director?
Thank you, Senator. So one of the things I'd like to do, consistent with what the Senator was talking about, is we need to do the hard work of actually looking kind of line by line and function by function about what are the organizations and functions that we can support and what are things that potentially are outside the scope of what we're doing. And we need to work with the all facets of the labor force to make sure that we have a plan going forward that to the extent that there are cuts that are appropriate in an organization, we have a way to deliver the services that are appropriate to the American people. So
But specifically, how do you plan to engage with the federal unions?
well, I very much will have an open door, and if anybody wants to come talk to me and provide input and feedback on the process, I'd be very happy to do that.
Does it concern you that the executive order issued by President Trump last week to eliminate collective bargaining rights for 1.5 million civil servants might make that engagement more challenging?
So, Senator, my understanding of that executive order is that it does recognize that the president has the ability to designate certain areas that are associated with national security where federal labor union employment may be less relevant than in other places. Look, I haven't had a chance to study it in detail, but I certainly will do so, and I'm sure that OPM will be a part of that process.
Well, I'd certainly like you to study it and love to talk to you about it. 1.5 million is a pretty broadening of the scope that hasn't been done by any president, either Republican or Democratic in the past. Mr. Ueland, are you concerned about the impact of the March 27th executive order and what it'll have on agency morale, retention, and performance across a wide part of the federal government responsible for protecting national security, providing care to our veterans, as well as responding to emergencies?
Senator, I'm actually excited about the opportunity the executive order lays out for giving the federal government the ability to align mission with responsibility and ensure at the end of the day, as Mr. Kupor has testified, we have the highest quality, highest qualified workforce assigned appropriately to the mission, task, and responsibilities of the federal government itself.
So as you're looking at this, would you take any steps to actually measure the impact of this executive order on services that many Americans rely on?
I haven't considered whether or not to measure, and if so, how to measure the sorts of impacts. I'll also point out that measurement should go beyond the impacts for workers. It should also go to the general private sector as well. How are our reformulations creating opportunities for individuals both to join the federal workforce, but the private sector providing goods and services as well to the general public?
So my question was on services that Americans rely on. How will this impact the services that Americans rely on? And I'm a little surprised to say, or to hear rather, that you don't know if you'll actually measure that. Certainly a business, if you're running a business, you measure everything. You want to make sure if you're putting policies in place, it actually accomplishes not the political rhetoric, but actually makes a difference on the ground. And we're talking about services to the American people that rely on each and every day, and you're telling me you're not going to measure that?
Senator, I do think that's a bit of a mischaracterization.
Well,
of
clarify,
what I said.
please.
Thank you very much. Senator, I am not yet having had the privilege of confirmation, if that's what the Senate elects to do, sitting in the chair and understanding appropriately where we are, where we're going, and if at all, the best way to measure what is ongoing, and as I said, what is occurring not just for the federal government, but out in the general public as well. So until or unless I have the chance of confirmation, I'm not going to commit to taking specific courses of action. In fact, I've tried to stay away from the role and responsibilities of the DDM during my service at OMB as the acting chief of staff.
Well, I would hope that you would measure and make sure that it's actually working. Certainly this committee, as an oversight function, we're going to make sure things are working. Mr. Kupor, based on your private sector experience, if you could give just a quick answer to the following actions as a very successful business person. Does it make sense to start a restructuring by firing folks who have just been promoted because of their outstanding performance? Yes or no?
Well, thank you, Senator. Look, it's very hard for me to comment on things that have happened when I haven't been in the role.
I'm just saying, would you fire in a business?
Well,
Would you fire someone you just promoted because they were outstanding? Are you going to say, well, you know, we're going to fire you now, but, you know, congratulations? Do you think that's good sense?
Senator, I've been very clear in my written responses and in the conversations that we've had that, look, I think the process is one that requires transparency and communication, and we need to recognize and respect the humanity of the workforce.
So you'd be troubled, but you're troubled by that.
I'll tell you again that I believe the right way to do this is through communication and respecting the rights and roles of the employees.
And the other question, does it make sense to fire everyone from a newly created office that your business believes is necessary and should be running, but you fire everybody in it anyways? Does that make sense?
Yeah, certainly, look, if I were in a business context, the right thing to do would be figure out what are the functions that we need to do, what are the things that we think are critical, and we certainly wouldn't want to lose functions unless we understood, is there some other substitutionary way that we could provide those services appropriately?
So basically, you would think about it before you did it. That's great. That's not what happened. So if confirmed, I hope that's the process that we see going forward, that we actually put some thought. And one other question, if I may, Mr. Chairman. Is it wise for business leaders to fire people with highly specialized, critical skills just because they're new?
Yeah, again, Senator, as I mentioned, look, I think the right way to do things is we should make sure if we're going to fire somebody or eliminate a service and it's a critical service that needs to be provided, we should make sure that there is a way to deliver those services.
Well, I hope there's forward thought. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Moody.
Thank you, Chairman. You were very measured in that response. I would say absolutely, if this last administration was walking out the door, some of the people they promoted and the money that they spent, it should absolutely be reviewed and reconsidered. You were very measured, and I respect that. I want to first thank you for being here, and thank you for using your gifts and talents and expertise and volunteering to serve your country. Probably doesn't pay as well as you might make on the outside world, and I really respect people that do that, so thank you. And I also say thank you to your family. Some of them I've been getting to know better. I have found over the course of my career, especially during transitions to new roles, it's harder on the families than it is those of us going through the career transition. And so I appreciate you supporting them, being here with them today. I know it means a lot to them, and certainly we thank you for supporting them through this. I happen to think, and this might be, I'm only 2 months in, but I have seen a lot of confirmation hearings over my first 2 months, and I happen to think that this specific hearing is one of the most important that we will conduct. And a lot of people don't know a lot about the Office of Personnel and Management and the Office of Management and Budget. I think right now, at this moment in time in our nation's history, and with this kind of leader at the helm like President Trump, these are probably two of the most important positions in this administration. And I say that because when President Trump was elected, he said, I am going to address the sprawling federal government, the wasteful spending, and indeed, the results showed this administration was given a mandate to examine this unelected federal bureaucracy that has ballooned over the decades and return it to being accountable to those elected by the people and ultimately to we the people. And you're coming in at a time where you have a leader that is willing to be brave enough to make the really hard decisions and be bold about that up front and say, in many respects, probably a good idea, as I mentioned earlier, but in some, these are going to be some tough choices on spending and policy, but we've got to make them. At some point, some leader's going to be in the position where they're going to have to say, some president's going to have to say, enough is enough, we've got to do something. It's not right for the future of this country and our children and grandchildren not to do something and step up. And now you're coming in at a time where you're expected not only to bring your expertise and experience to these roles, but I believe one of the reasons President Trump has put together such a great team, the things that he's looking for is not just expertise in the role, but a very crucial trait is the ability to communicate the importance of the actions that are being taken to the American people. Because rightfully so, in any time of transition and change, If the public doesn't understand how we got here or what's going on, I happen to think as things are coming out, Americans are like, what do you mean we spend our hard-earned tax money on this woke and wasteful, nonsensical program that totally conflicts not only with my own values, but American values and interests? I think they're shocked in many respects. I also think they're shocked in many respects how fiscally irresponsible we have been, and now we find ourselves, and we've got to have people step in and take charge for the sake of this country. So coming into these roles, and I'll start with you, Mr. Kupor, how do you expect you will be able to take on that role of communicating transparently and responsibly in a way that understands the American public's anxiety with going through a necessary reevaluation of American priorities and spending?
Yeah, well, thank you, Senator, and I think you and I discussed this. Look, I believe communication is absolutely critical here. Having, unfortunately, in my private sector career, been through many types of restructurings, when you do things where you don't communicate the narrative and help people understand not just the what we're doing, but also why we're doing it, what the implications are, quite frankly, people create their own narratives, and unfortunately that often does bring them to very dark places. And so I think one of the things that I hope to do through OPM is for us to be a leader in talking about what we're doing, why we're doing it. And again, I think we can take the very hard actions that you're talking about, but also respect the fact that we are talking about people's jobs here, and we have to be respectful of that. But I don't think we should confuse that with the requirement to actually bring people along and help them understand exactly why we're doing what we're doing.
Mr. Ueland?
Absolutely. I associate myself with both Mr. Cooper's comments, and one of the things that Senator Nichols didn't mention is part of my experience up here in the Senate and in Congress was on the communication side, and the need for clarity of message, purposefulness of advocacy, explanation, as I talked about, to the committee, to Congress, to the workforce, to the general public, is something that seizes me, and if I am confirmed, will be something that will be part of the work that I do as the Deputy Director for Management.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Hassan.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member Peters, for this hearing. To the nominees, thank you for being here today. Congratulations, and congratulations to your families, too. This is a big day for you and for them. Before I ask you some questions, I do want to say a quick word on the Trump administration's use of Signal, with a journalist included in the chat, to discuss the recent U.S. attack on Houthi terrorists in Yemen. It is imperative that a thorough, transparent investigation be conducted into the National Security Advisor's use of a commercial text application to discuss the timing of a U.S. military attack. This put our troops' lives at risk, and the fact that this administration won't acknowledge that is an insult to the men and women in uniform. We also know that members of the Trump National Security Council have used personal email accounts to conduct government business, and I hope that this committee will hold a hearing on this incredibly serious issue. I also just want to start, I was listening to the chair about the need to fire the federal workforce, and I just want to talk about the impact that these random, arbitrary mass firings are having on my constituents. Just this week, the administration essentially closed the entire office for LIHEAP, the Low Income Energy Home Assistance Program, established by Congress in 1981. It serves 6.2 million people from Maine to Texas, help with their heat. New Hampshire, it was 30 degrees on Saturday and snowing. It may be spring here, but it's not yet in New Hampshire. And in Texas, it's going to be real hot this summer, and one of the purposes of that program is to make sure that people can stay safe and cool enough in their homes during a blazing summer. So the administration, nothing transparent about this, they just shut the office, even though the money has been appropriated. So that's the impact on my constituents. At the same time, by the way, that the Trump tariffs are adding 10% to my constituents' home fuel bills. So this is real stuff. And when we talk about arbitrary firings, which is what this administration has done, we are talking about a level of harm to our constituents that is real and that does not meet the mission that was established by this Congress. So I would suggest that at OMB or at OPM, if you all want to gut a program, you better come back to Congress, because that's what the Constitution says you are supposed to do. Now, I also want to ask both of you a simple, straightforward question is something I am sadly having to ask of every nominee in this administration. If directed by the president to take action that would break the law, would you follow the law or follow the president's directives? Mr. Kupor?
Thank you, Senator. I certainly do not expect the president to ask me to do anything to that effect, but I will 100% comply with all laws and with the Constitution.
And Mr. Ueland?
The President's made crystal clear, Senator, that he will follow the Constitution and the law. He will not ever ask inferior officers to violate the law.
Well, both of your,
I'm very simple for me to answer the question that absolutely I'm going to be able to follow the Constitution and the law.
Well, you know, Mr. Vogt sat here at this table, the person you're going to be reporting to, and told us that he knew better than the United States Supreme Court about the constitutionality of the impoundment law, which he is violating and the administration is violating. I am deeply disappointed that both of you seem to either not read the news or not observe basic facts, which is the President of the United States has been violating the law on a regular basis since he took office. Now, I also just want to explore with you, Mr. Kupor, the limits of the OPM director's authority. If someone in the administration, let's say Stephen Miller or Elon Musk, were to say to you, I need you to fire a veteran who works for the VA because they posted something online in their personal capacity that I don't like, would you fire that veteran?
Thank you, Senator. My understanding of the OPM's restrictions are that we can provide guidance, but OPM does not have the authority to actually go in and to do firing. So if those were to happen, those would have to be conducted by the agencies themselves.
Do you think it's ever appropriate to fire an employee, let's say, providing expert service at the VA because of their political views?
I certainly think that we should make sure that we're evaluating people for the skills that are appropriate for what they're doing, and if they're those things are interfering with their ability to do their job, then that's worth discussing. But otherwise, we need to evaluate people based on the performance objectives of their role.
And you do know what the First Amendment of the United States Constitution says?
Yes, Senator.
The government may not interfere with free speech. Now, I have one more question. In January, President Trump, this is to you, Mr. Kupor, illegally fired several inspectors general, including the Inspector General for OPM. Since then, in response to concerns that Elon Musk's Doge has improperly accessed the sensitive personal information of hundreds of thousands of Americans via OPM systems, the acting Inspector General at OPM has confirmed that his office is looking into the matter. Will you commit to allowing the acting Inspector General and his office to continue this investigation without any interference or retribution?
Yes, Senator, as you and I have discussed, I think protecting data privacy is incredibly important, and we absolutely want a system where if people have concerns that there's an appropriate way to investigate that.
So you will commit to allowing the OPM's Office of Inspector General to operate without political interference in all matters?
We will commit to do everything that is required under law to make sure that data privacy is protected and that the laws and regulations are followed.
That's not,
Time has
I'm
expired.
sad to say, the answer I was looking for. Thank you.
I'd like to interject just briefly at this point. There are allegations made that the president is acting illegally, and these are simply allegations and will be adjudicated by the court. In the previous Trump administration, he fired the head of the CFPB, the Consumer Financial Protection Board. It's the only operating case we have recently, and it went to the Supreme Court, and they ruled that he had the Congress couldn't limit his firing. So there's a debate. Can Congress limit the president from firing people? It's not an open and shut case that something is either illegal or isn't illegal. It's going to be determined by the courts. This goes back to the Civil War. The radical Republicans tried to tell Andrew Johnson that he couldn't fire Edwin Stanton, the Secretary of War, and they made a statute saying he couldn't fire people in his own cabinet. That was ultimately struck down by the courts. There have been a series of cases, and there's going to be more. And I'm not sure whether the inspector generals are exactly the same as CFPB, but it's not an open and shut case on hiring and firing. And the president's going to have a certain amount of leeway, and the courts are going to have to decide that. The same with the Impoundment Act. I side with many on your side who don't believe that they can impound funds indefinitely. But I think there's a real question whether or not waiting a month or 2 months or 3 months is impoundment or a pause. I really think the courts will have a tough time defining something as impoundment unless it's still sitting there through the fiscal year. If you get beyond September 30th, I think it's going to be pretty clear it's been impounded. Is that legal or illegal? That's going to be determined by the courts too. But I don't think it's absolutely certain that looking at spending and upending things and doing all the things that are being done now is yet impoundment. I think it's a debatable point. So from where I sit, I just wouldn't call things carte blanche illegal, legal or legal. And everybody has the right to do that, but there is another opinion, and I just want to make sure that was put forward. Senator Langford.
Chairman, thank you. Gentlemen, thanks very much. You've put a lot of years in to be able to serve your nation and to be able to serve people, and I appreciate you stepping through this process. It's not a fun process to be able to go through for you or your family, and so I appreciate very much the work that you've already done to be able to prepare for this. I'm going to walk through several questions just as rapidly as I can. Scott, there was a massive data breach at OPM a decade ago. Every federal worker has still struggled with that and still feels vulnerable because of that. You've worked with data for a long time and have done a lot of great work on that. What are you going to do when you step into this role, if confirmed, to be able to help protect that integrity of that federal data?
Yeah, so thank you, Senator. I certainly do not want to see a repeat of what happened, obviously, many years ago. One of the first things that I will do is do a full business review, not just of, all of our functions, but certainly data privacy and data protection. And so that will be one of the first orders of business when I hopefully have the opportunity to serve.
Great, that'd be very helpful. There's been a lot of conversation about federal workers and being removed through the process, but we have just as much of a struggle, quite frankly, on the other side. There are 120 different hiring authorities. And every agency and entity says, I hate all of them on it because of the complexity. We have made the federal workforce incredibly complicated, both to hire or to remove or to be able to do oversight through the process. I want to talk about just the hiring portion of it, because we will get back to doing hiring in the days ahead for key roles, while we're in the process of also reducing the size of federal government as well. What are your thoughts on decreasing the complexity of the federal hiring process?
Yeah, so as you may know, I think the president put out an executive order saying that we have a target now of 80 days to make sure from kind of imposition of a role to actually have somebody in seat. And one of the things that I expect OPM to do is to go through the entire hiring process. So everything from, quite frankly, I think you and I have talked to us, we do a really poor job of hiring people out of universities, for example. Right. We don't utilize our internships for full-time employment. There's all kinds of things I think we can do and we should do, both to streamline the process and, quite frankly, to ensure that we get the highest quality applicants through the process very quickly.
I think it would be shocking to a lot of the American people that they find out, because a lot of people have served as an intern in some spot or as a journeyman in a different role and everything else, and we just assume those folks are trying to be able to get to that job. But in the federal workforce, that's incredibly difficult to move from an intern that some supervisor may say, gosh, they're really good at this, we should bring them on. And it's, yeah, they've got to go through a 120-day process, and by that point, they're gone on it. And so it is a real challenge that's got to be able to be fixed. Telework is one of those things that there's been a lot of bashing on telework. But quite frankly, I have spoken out frequently on an issue for things like spouses of federal law enforcement or for active duty military, that they, by their job and their family, move every 3 years. It's very difficult for them to get to careers. There are some jobs that you can do by telework, where you're answering a phone and answering a question, for instance. You could do that literally from any place on earth. This is a great opportunity for people that are already serving in our military or serving in law enforcement for their spouse to also develop a career if they get into that job. That's one example of many on that. How would you handle the supervision of telework once we actually balance this out?
Yeah, thank you, Senator. As you know, the president also has issued an executive order on that. And even in that executive order, his entreaty to OPM was, let's make sure we do this in a way that recognizes some of these cases that you're describing. So I want to make sure as we provide guidance through OPM that we do recognize, to your point, there may be instances where it does make sense to have a policy, particularly in the case of military spouses or, as you mentioned, other law enforcement individuals. So I think we need to approach those as individual matters.
Great, thanks, I appreciate that. Eric, all you had to do was have Don Nichols introduce you, and I'm done. Okay, that was it. So once that occurs, I'm ready to vote, to be able to go from there. But
thank you, Senator. Thanks
for your many years of service, and you've served in so many ways for the American people. Many folks have not met you before, but they got a chance to be able to hear a great introduction of you and to be able to hear just how much you have done behind the scenes for so many people for so long. So thanks for that. Thanks for stepping into this role on it. You and I have talked about the federal program inventory. This was something that started years ago that we finally got passed in the first Trump administration. To their credit, the Biden OMB office continued the work behind the scenes for the federal program inventory. It's still unfinished, but we still cannot say everything the federal government does. We cannot ask, the American people cannot do a quick internet search to say, how many job training programs does the federal government do? We don't know on that. So the federal program inventory is incredibly important to be able to finish out. If we're going to fight duplication, we got to be able to see it. So what are your thoughts on finishing this out for the federal program inventory?
Well, thanks for the question, Senator. And right, you can't manage what you can't measure. And right now, we just don't know. And that is incredibly exasperating to anybody going through line by line of the federal budget, trying to determine whether or not we've got it right. So my commitment is to drive the team to finish that inventory, to provide that roll-up and ultimately that information to Congress, to taxpayers, the general public, and then from there help Congress and the director make decisions about what's appropriate in the federal fiscal envelope that ultimately Congress and the executive branch are going to
Great,
set.
thanks. Two things that you and I talked about, I'm not going to ask you a question on, but just mention again publicly. One is making sure that OMB is actually pushing on our contractors and subcontractors to actually use the E-Verify. That is something that is required by federal law, and my understanding is it's just not being done. So we want to make sure that federal tax dollars for federal projects are actually going to American citizens on it. And the other one is to have OIRA review for independent agencies. They're not a fourth branch of government. They do need to have some oversight in that process. Thank you.
Thanks for bringing those both up. And very briefly, Mr. Chairman, yes, absolutely. We're committed to both of those. Obviously, the president has spoken very directly on these things. And at OMB, we are well underway. And if I have a chance to be confirmed, dive deep on implementing those thrusts, those steers.
Are they ready to vote? Are they sitting there voting as well? Senator Kim.
Thank you, Chairman. And Mr. Chair, I just wanted to also just flag that I also agree with my colleagues that the importance of this committee taking action to be able to shine a light on what happened in terms of this administration's use of unsecure, unclassified commercial channels, including Signal and Gmail. I think that this is something that's important, something that we should be investigating, something that we should have a hearing on in this committee. So I urge the chairman to work with us to be able to bring that to light. Mr. Kupor, I wanted to just start with you. I enjoyed our conversation. I appreciated the chance to be able to talk with you. And one thing that we talked about is the importance of the federal workforce being clear that it serves the American people, right? That we need to make sure that there is no question that the workforce is serving the American people. Is that correct?
Yes, Senator.
So I told you I was a civil servant. So I worked in the federal civil service. One thing that was made very clear to us is that those serving our country, working in this, having access to the information of our country, that we were barred from political activity, campaigning, other things like that through the Hatch Act. Do you recognize the importance of that separation?
Yes, Senator.
I guess I wanted to just ask you then, should Elon Musk be held to the same standard as the rest of those that serve our country?
I don't know specifically with respect to the issues you're talking about with Elon, but in general, yes, I think anybody who serves the federal government should comply with all the rules and all the regulations that are appropriate to an employee of the government.
Do you think someone with the level of access that Elon Musk has had, including participating in cabinet meetings, that he should be subject or at least held to the standards of the Hatch Act?
Look, again, I don't know what the Hatch Act, I don't know where the limitations of the Hatch Act are or not, but I would say my understanding is he's employed as a special government employee, and I'm sure there's a set of rules and regulations that apply that, I would expect that he would comply with.
Well, I would hope, the OPM was the one that sent me the guidance about the Hatch Act when I was in government, and so, I certainly ask that you engage on that, but yes, just from a standpoint here, I mean, look, I went home and, I did some town halls throughout New Jersey, and people were just asking, look, he's got government contracts. He's getting money, he's got business before our government, now having access to so much of the information within the government and also, campaigning actively around the country. That unsettles me. It to me, seems very clearly crossing the line of what a government employee or someone who is serving this country in whatever capacity, whatever title he has, the fact that he has this much access to our government, has so much influence within our government. I wanted to ask you, does it bother you?
Look, again, I'm not trying to be argumentative here. I don't know what the restrictions are with respect to his work via the Hatch Act. What I can tell you as a general matter is anybody who is a federal employee, I strongly believe, and OPM will support this, that they should follow all the rules and all the regulations, including the Hatch Act. And if there are violations of that, then those should be dealt with appropriately.
Well, look, I'd like to follow up with you on that if you're confirmed, but what I was trying to convey here is just a sense of, just get a sense of from you how this feels to you. If you share the discomfort. I mean, my constituents in New Jersey, they don't know the ins and outs either of the Hatch Act, but they can tell that this isn't right. And that's just something that I wanted to flag for you. Mr. Ueland, I wanted to just ask you what your thoughts were in terms of the dismantling of USAID and whether or not you thought that was lawful. You worked at the State Department, you've been engaged in foreign assistance. What do you think was, how do you think the administration handled that, and do you think it was lawful?
I do think it's lawful, and the court has affirmed the decisions of the secretary in that regard. USAID has been effectively shuttered, and certain key roles and responsibilities removed to the Department of State, with the Secretary's insistence that appropriate health and life-saving programs will continue under the direction of the Department of State.
Do you think that the administration has the same authorities that it would, to be able to, for instance, close and abolish the Department of Education?
Senator, I would expect that the courts ultimately will have a voice on this, but there are a variety of statutes, not just creating the Department of Education, but also reduction in force, that clearly are going to be invoked as part of the process of reducing the footprint of the Department of Education and finding ways to return authority and responsibility of education programs to states.
Chairman, I'll yield back.
We're going to go to Senator Moreno next, and I may have to leave for a few minutes. He will take over the committee, and I will go to another committee and come back in just a few minutes. But Senator Moreno, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Scott, you've invested, give me a sense of how many companies Andreessen Horowitz has invested in since the time you were there to start in the firm. A sense of scale, like how many, off the top of your head?
It's been thousands.
Thousands?
Yes, sir.
Has any company you've ever invested in, where you actually put your private capital and your partner's capital in, ever been run the way the United States government is run in terms of excessive cost, inefficiency, bureaucracy, and ineptitude?
Well, thank you, Senator. We certainly have had CEOs who sometimes have different skill sets in some of these areas, but certainly as an investor, one of the things we focus on as board members is ultimately, return on investment. And what that means in the private sector is, do we have somebody who understands what they're spending, why they're spending, what they're getting out of that? And we've certainly had times where those CEOs have had to make changes, unfortunately, in employment and otherwise, in order to affect those outcomes.
Do you think $2 trillion a year in deficits, paying $1 trillion a year in interest is a sustainable path?
No, Senator, and obviously, as you and I have talked, and as I reiterated my opening statement today, I believe we are on an unsustainable fiscal path, and I think we need to help the American people understand that, just as they do with their own checkbooks, that the federal government needs to be held to the same standards.
And who's going to pay the price? Like, if you say unsustainable path, like, who pays the price? Is it people of our generation, 30-year-olds like you and I? Who pays the price for this ineptitude?
No, sir. Ultimately, look, what we are doing is effectively creating an unsurmountable debt for, our children, our grandchildren, and future generations. And it's just fundamentally unfair, and it's something that I do believe we need to address.
So the status quo is just no longer acceptable. Is that fair?
Yes, Senator.
And then going back to the Office of Personnel Management, you, again, thousands of companies. I ran and owned several companies myself prior to being here. How many companies have you ever seen, like in your entire career, where 69% of the employees are rated above average? Give me a sense of how many.
Yeah, I've never seen a company that's been successful that has that level of rating.
Meaning if it were accurate. In other words,
that's correct. Yes.
What would you do if you found the CEO that could have created a team of people where almost 70% of the people are at the top rating?
Yeah, so either this is the most incredible set of workforce we've ever seen, or as you're suggesting, it just really defies logic at the end of the day. And look, this is important not only to ensure that we have accountability, but it's also important from a compensation and incentives perspective, right? We want people who are doing well, quite frankly, to be recognized. I think we should recognize federal employees who are fantastic, and let's pay them appropriately. Let's give them promotions. But we have to have a system that doesn't peanut butter out effectively incentives and that does distinguish between top performers and, unfortunately, people who are not doing their roles.
Yeah, and hiring is hard, right? I mean, hiring is hard. In my company, we used to say take a long time to hire and a short time to fire, because hiring is hard. You have a interview and you try to get the best sense of who's going to work there, but ultimately, you have a batting average and you want to do as well as you can. Have you ever had a CEO that was so good at hiring that only 0.4% of the workforce was below average?
No, Senator. I've
that could bat at 99.6%.
No, Senator. I have
that would be remarkable. I mean, that person would be CEO of the world ever, right? They would put a statue of that person. So we have to fix that, right? Because nothing's worse in an organization than working with inept people. Because if you're a high performer and you're surrounded by people that aren't pulling their weight, aren't doing the job they're supposed to do, it's insanely demoralizing. Would you agree with that?
I agree. And if I could just, Senator, I mean, look, I think you're exactly right, which is this is an issue of fairness to the people who are actually doing great work. So this is not a demonization, quite frankly, of the workforce. This is a recognition that when great people do great work, quite frankly, we should reward them for that. And everybody knows that if you have an organization where people are not performing, the right and the humane thing, quite frankly, to do is either, if you can counsel them and fix them, that's great. But if they can't perform, it is to go have them do some other place where they can actually exercise their appropriate skills.
Well, thank you, Scott. I look forward to confirming you. Thank you for doing this. I'm sure there's a lot of other things in your life that you could do than this. So thank you for serving your country.
Thank you.
Eric, mind if I call you Eric, because Ueland, I don't know, it's too complicated to pronounce. But
Tell me about it.
First of all, your daughter's always a shining star in the cloakroom. I don't know how she always smiles like that, but she's great. Real briefly, in 20 seconds or less, do you think it's fair that the taxpayers of this country do not know that we have people here in Washington, D.C. that are willing to send $40 or $50 billion a year to foreign countries to help foreign citizens in foreign countries when our people need help? Our seniors are struggling. Our middle class is struggling. We have a problem with housing. And yet we have a government that prioritizes sending tens of billions of dollars to foreign countries. Do you think the average American understands that this government has done that?
No, Senator, I still don't believe that the average American understands it, but I believe the average American understands where President Trump stands, the agenda he set, the objectives he's laid out, the goals he expects all of us to accomplish, and the mission set that we have to deliver courtesy of his mandate.
And as the temporary chairman, I'm going to tell myself I'm out of time and I have to move on. So I will recognize my fellow Colombian, Senator Gallego.
Gracias. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And before I begin my questioning, I do want to take a moment to call for a committee hearing focus on Signalgate, since that is part of our coverage and jurisdiction here. Messages containing war plans or other highly sensitive information on unsecure apps like Signal can easily be intercepted by adversaries. This reckless move is particularly concerning because sophisticated adversaries like Russia and Iran, which provide support to the Houthis, could have intercepted these messages and passed them along to the Houthis, who could have acted on that information to kill American service members. In light of even most recent news regarding widespread use of Signal by top administration officials, we owe it to these brave fighters and the American people to get to the bottom of this to ensure it never happens again. So thank you for indulging me. Now I turn to my questions. Mr. Kupor, thank you for joining us as we consider your nomination to Director of OPM. My guest at the President's State of the Union address is one of thousands of veterans who have been fired due to Elon Musk's cuts to the federal workforce. My guest's 16-year career as a dedicated employee at the Department of Defense and Department of Homeland Security exemplifies the arbitrary and haphazard approach currently being undertaken by Musk, OPM, and the U.S. DOGE service. So yes or no, if you're asked to fire additional veterans, will you follow the continued targeting of these men and women who put their lives on the line for our country and who embody their highest standards of discipline, or can we find a pathway to at least give them some opportunity to keep their jobs?
Yeah, thank you, Senator. Just two things, if I could, very quickly. Number one, just to reiterate, as you know, OPM does not have authority to fire individuals, so any activities would be through the agency. And secondly, one of the things that perhaps we could work on together is I do think there's an opportunity to meaningfully reform how we think about the reduction in force rules, including things like VSIP and otherwise, that I think would allow us to have a very rational process when we unfortunately find ourselves in situations where we have to identify spending cuts.
Right, and so one of the things, so you kind of just went into that, which I would appreciate. Will you commit to prioritizing transparency and providing lawmakers and the public with accurate, up-to-date information on the number and types of personnel being laid off before coordinating or executing additional layoffs? As a personal peeve of mine, for example, I also sit on the VA committee, and the VA committee announced 15% cuts to the Phoenix VA, which for us that have lived there and used the Phoenix VA seems both arbitrary and just pure crazy, and we have zero insight into what the process was, what the thinking was, where did the 15% come from, how is this going to affect services, is it going to affect services? And so this is where I think, OPM could be much better at communicating, what is, even if we're going to disagree, I want to see what the thought process is. I want you to show me your work.
Yes, Senator. Look, we want to do this in a way that is transparent and responsive to the needs of Congress and the needs of the American people. And so I look forward to working with you on that.
Great, thank you. Mr. Cooper, another casualty of this administration mass layoffs has been is the CHIPS program officer. So far, a third of its staff has been decimated, creating chaos for the semiconductor companies trying to invest in Arizona. And it's one of our fastest growing economies in Arizona in terms of also just high wages. So we're very concerned, obviously, that if we can't effectively distribute some of the funds from the CHIPS program, that we're going to have some of these companies either not invest, move away, and who knows what's going to happen when it comes to the effectiveness of this, some of the tariffs now. So additionally, some companies may not be able to obtain their funds, and new grant programs may not be announced. So already semiconductor companies have reached out to our office saying that they are extremely confused because their points of contact have just absolutely departed. They have no one to talk to. So given this critical importance to Arizona's burgeoning semiconductor industry, both obviously for national security and for trade, and of course the president's stated goal, he was very happy when TSMC said they're going to add 3 more fabs in Arizona for a total of 6 fabs. Do you commit to protecting the CHIPS program office from future workforce reductions, which would be in line also with the president's goal of making sure that our chip manufacturing returns to the United States?
Yeah, Mr. Senator, as you know, look, it's very hard for me to make a specific commitment with respect to a specific program, but maybe if I can answer your question more generally, one of the things that I expect OPM to do as we look at the plans that the agencies are providing to us is to ask these hard questions, which is, okay, if we are reducing headcount, what is our plan if these are critical services for how we deliver them and make sure there is no interruption? And I certainly hope that we will have an influence on that.
In some regards, like what, a lot of us are just questioning why didn't it start the other way? I think many of us actually were looking back at the Clinton days where there was just joint agreement of working together in a bipartisan manner to find where we can find cuts, find efficiencies, cut bureaucracy. Instead, it seems like we're cutting first and then asking questions later, which may work in the VC world, but when you actually have services to deliver to, for example, veterans that expect someone to pick up the Veteran Crisis Hotline, or you have seniors that need to get their Social Security, it doesn't work like the VC world. So as much as my Colombian brother over there thinks everything is analogous to the business world doesn't have to defend, 2 borders, doesn't have to take care of millions of seniors, whether it's on Medicare or Medicaid or Social Security, doesn't have to take care of hundreds of thousands of veterans. That's something that government can only do. And this is why I think it's important that we keep that in mind before we take this VC Silicon Valley idea that we break it and then figure it out later. Because when you break things in government, people die. Thank you, and I yield back my time.
Senator Hawley.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Congratulations to the nominees. Nice to see you. Mr. Cooper, I enjoyed our conversation the other day. Nice to see you here in person today. As the nominee to be director of OPM, you're going to play a very significant role in overseeing policies that affect federal employee programs, of course, including those related to health care and employee benefits. And I just want to get your sense, your views about pro-life policies and how they may influence your approach in this role, because it's going to be very important to what you do. Are you familiar with the Smith Amendment? Does that ring a bell?
I'm familiar vaguely, but not with specifics.
Okay, well that's fine. Let me just give you a little refresher. The Smith Amendment is a longstanding pro-life provision of law since 1982 that prohibits financial services and government appropriations from being used, and here I'll just quote the statute, for an abortion or the administrative expenses in connection with any health plan under the Federal Employees Health Benefits Program, which provides any benefits or coverage for abortions, except for in cases of rape, incest, and life of the mother. That absolutely includes OPM, and it's significant because prior to the Smith Amendment's enactment, OPM administered plans, these are federal health benefit plans, funded approximately 17,000 abortions nationwide yearly. This is with taxpayer money, I want to emphasize, costing the taxpayers almost $10 million a year. Now, that was 40 years ago. So the Smith Amendment has been in effect since that time. It enacts and represents this bedrock commitment that we have that we don't use, whatever your position may be on abortion, and I'm 100% pro-life, but even if you're not, we have long agreed in this country we don't use taxpayer funding for abortions. and for the administrative expenses associated with abortion. So with that background, will you commit to upholding the Smith Amendment and ensuring that OPM funds are not used in any way to support or promote or pay for abortion services?
Yes, Mr. Senator, look, if I have the opportunity to serve at OPM, I'm going to follow all of the laws and regulations, including the Smith Amendment, as you described. So
good.
Anything that is appropriate under the legal framework, I can assure you we'll follow.
Good, fantastic. Your predecessor in this role used her post to promote with a vengeance, if I might say, critical race theory, intersectionality, DEI. I mean, let me just hit a few of the highlights. This is Kiran Ahuja. While she was Chief of Staff for OPM during the Obama administration, she praised civil unrest in the United States, praised it as a means of finally coming to terms with our racist history as a country. While she was OPM director, she published the government-wide strategic plan to advance DEI and accessibility, diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility in the federal workforce. She created the Chief Diversity Officers Network Council. She issued guidance on gender identity, directing agencies to set internal policies and procedures on how to handle transitions, gender transitions that is, and how to support transitioning employees. That's a quote. She banned agencies from assessing salary histories before hiring because it could exacerbate pre-existing inequality. So let me just ask you, are you going to unwind all of that nonsense that the American people got a good hard look at in November, I might add, and said an emphatic no to the trans ideology, no to men in women's locker rooms, no to critical race theory and calling this country a racist country that's systemically evil and ruined and terrible? Are you going to put a stop to that in OPM and get OPM focused back again on its core mission?
Yeah, Mr. Senator, I want to make sure that we focus on how do we create a great workforce that is responsive to the needs of the people and that does so in a way that's efficient. As you well know, of course, the President has already issued executive orders with respect to the DEI departments in government, and we will fully comply with those.
Fantastic. You'll vigorously enforce those, I would assume, Mr.
Yes,
Cooper.
Senator.
Yes, very good. Mr. Ueland, it's nice to see you again, and I've enjoyed working with you over the years. Congratulations on this nomination. Thanks for being willing to do it. And the committee has just a tremendous letter in your support from the Susan B. Anthony list and the National Right to Life Committee, talking about your longstanding commitment to the pro-life cause, to the basic principle that every child born in this country deserves to be treated with equality and fairness, welcomed and protected. And it's a tremendous letter. It's great to see a member of the administration get this kind of support from the pro-life community. If this has not already been entered into the record, Mr. Chairman, I'd ask unanimous consent to do so.
Without objection.
Mr. Ueland, let me just, in the remaining moments here, let me just give you an opportunity to talk about what your priorities will be. And let me say, again, congratulations to you on this nomination. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Senator. I really appreciate that. Very quickly, obviously, to serve with honor and dignity and effectuate the President's agenda. In terms of the DDM specifically, make sure that what we're doing to protect our cybersecurity, the information of taxpayers and employees, is advocated and ensured. See what we can do with newer technology and ways to help downsize, rescope, and reorient the federal government as the President has directed, and ultimately serve at the pleasure of the Director and the Deputy Director for any other duties that might be assigned to me.
Very good. Congratulations to you both. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
Senator Slotkin.
Thank you. Thanks for being here today and Mr. Kupor meeting in my office. My concern, as I raised with you in my office, is the security of the data of the people who serve in the federal government and in the U.S. military. We had a conversation about how when I was at the Pentagon, myself and tens of thousands of others had our data stolen by the Chinese government, a foreign actor who hacked our system and got a ton of some of our most sensitive information from OPM, right? So the agency that you're hoping to take over here. At the same time, we have reports that the DOGE folks are getting access to taxpayer information, to information for folks on Medicare, so sensitive health information. We see them now pointing their sort of sights on military and veteran information. You are the ultimate arbiter of personnel policy. give me some assurance that you're just not going to let Mr. Musk and the Doge folks go in, take our data, put it into AI-enabled software, and use it for any other way than what, people have given permission for.
Yes, Senator, thank you, and I enjoyed the conversation we had together. Look, I mentioned this earlier. I believe very strongly in data privacy, as we talked about, and when I'm running OPM, if I have the opportunity to do so, we will ensure that we protect data privacy and make sure that people who are not authorized to have access to systems will not have that access.
Yeah, the thing that I'm looking for is just a little bit of backbone that when this is happening at another agency, right? So now they go into the Veterans Administration or they go into the Department of Defense. They already went into the Treasury over the head of the Secretary of the Treasury. It's embarrassing. He came in front of Congress and said, I'm not going to let anyone have taxpayer information. And then literally in the same week, Doge announced that they were taking all this information, sometimes on their own servers that they brought into the departments and agencies. So I'm not looking for like, well, if they come to me with this specific problem, I'm going to raise my hand and do something about it. I'm looking to you as the person who will be the guardian of our policy on information on U.S. persons, that you will stick up and say, hey, I'm concerned that I'm hearing these reports. I'm going to go out and I'm going to proactively do something about it. So how do I know that you're not going to just be another Secretary of the Treasury who tells us one thing and then goes and gets his authorities just rammed over by Doge and a bunch of 20-year-olds?
Well, Senator, look, I believe OPM is a really important part of the equation in the broader personnel system, and I will do as you're describing. I mean, I don't think it's appropriate for us to give access to systems if people aren't rightly available to see those.
Okay.
And I certainly think OPM can play a role there.
I hope you do. We haven't seen that backbone yet, but I'm still hoping. Mr. Ueland, in your role at OMB, I think about the movement of money and how important it can be to some of our communities. In Michigan, we just had terrible ice storms. We had 100,000 people without power, still 50,000 people approximately right now in the northern part of our lower peninsula are without power. The governor's been up there. She invited President Trump to come and see it. We haven't filed a declaration of emergent federal request for help yet. But how do I know that if a state like Michigan asks for money from FEMA, does all the paperwork the way we traditionally do when we have an emergency, how do I know that you'll treat our state fairly, that you'll be objective about it, that you won't bring politics into it, and that you will administer the funds regardless of whether the state has a Democratic governor or a Republican governor?
Senator, thanks for the question. If the state of Michigan or any other state makes an application through the appropriate FEMA channels, then they will be appropriately reviewed, and the president will have an opportunity to make a decision on those applications. If Michigan has not yet elected to make a submission, then there's really nothing we can react to right now.
Of course. No, we would have to make that. My concern is that we've heard lots of rumors about the future of FEMA and the desire by the Trump administration to collapse FEMA, declare it no longer an agency, go to block grants, some other kinds of assistance. Do you have a view on the existence of FEMA since this committee oversees that body?
Great question, Senator, and I'm old enough to have been young enough to be around when FEMA went through pretty significant expansion starting in the early 1990s under then President Clinton. There is no doubt that the roles and responsibilities of FEMA, as well as many other organizations, agencies, and departments of the federal government, deserve a review, especially given some of the most atrocious, irresponsible, and long lingering do-outs that we've seen as examples of FEMA failures here in the past few years under the previous administration. So it's a calling from the president to take a look at FEMA, as well as a lot of other things, and see whether or not it's fit for purpose here in the 21st century. What's the role of states? What's the role of communities? What's the role of the private sector in moments of disaster? And that conversation, I'm sure, will be robust, both internally and with Congress, and I look forward to engaging with the committee on it.
I think we're coming up on the term of limitations when we can blame others. You now own it, right? You're going to own it over there. And so we look forward to what you're going to do to make sure that FEMA, or the capabilities of FEMA, endure. The Secretary of Homeland Security was the beneficiary. So in any case, we look forward to you fixing it and what you're going to do to make sure we still get that assistance out.
Well, I appreciate that, Senator. And quickly, Mr. Chairman, before the hearing concludes, there have been a lot of requests this morning for an investigation about Signalgate, so-called Signalgate. I'm just here to say, on behalf of at least myself, just as an individual, knowing many of the people who are involved in that signal chain, those are men and women of the highest caliber. They serve our country with distinction. They had no intent, nor did they release inappropriate information to the general public, and the mission in which they were engaged on the direction and authority of the President of the United States was highly successful. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Ernst.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks to our nominees for being here today. There has been a lot of discussion about reductions in force today, and Mr. Kupor, I'll just ask you, if you happen to know this, what % of federal employees have received a reduction in force notice?
Yes, Senator. I don't know the specific number, but it's a relatively small number if you look at the overall workforce today.
Yes, and while the RIFs are front and center, let's look at some of the employees who might need to get a RIF notice if they haven't already. A Veterans Affairs manager responsible for scheduling veterans appointments posted on social media that he was phoning it in from a bubble bath while calls to the VA have gone unanswered. Yes, that is a hairy leg hanging out of a bathtub. That is the actual photo that he posted during his work hours and on a Zoom call. An Army veteran gave up on getting mental health, and please listen to this, everyone. An Army veteran gave up on getting mental health care from the VA because after years of trying to get an appointment, he met with a therapist who, quote, spent the appointment singing the praises of remote work with a cat draped around her neck. He said it was such a disaster that, quote, now I'm just on my meds doing my best. A HUD employee was arrested for drunk driving at 3:30 in the afternoon on a Friday and may have been paid for time spent sitting in jail. HUD had no idea until I told them. For more than 3 years, a Social Security employee was running a home inspection business. Meanwhile, his mother was responding to his emails. It should have been a hole-in-one, but it took the IRS nearly a decade to fire an IRS employee who was golfing on the taxpayer's dime. The E in DOGE doesn't stand for elimination, it stands for efficiency. The American people are best served by an efficient workforce full of good employees, and there are many. I have been heartened by the number of federal employees who have approached me blowing the whistle on bureaucrats who are failing to live up to the standards we expect. There are so many more unnamed federal employees, like the current acting administrator of the Social Security Administration, Mr. Dudek, who know veterans and taxpayers deserve better than bubble bath bureaucrats and self-interested therapists. Mr. Dudek demonstrated his commitment to stopping fraud and improper payments and was rewarded with a big promotion. So Mr. Kupor and Mr. Ueland, how can agencies be empowered to not only dismiss bad employees quickly, but also provide positive incentives for good employees like fast-tracked promotions and other rewards? And I'll start with you, Mr. Kupor.
Great, thank you, Senator. We talked about this a little bit in your office, so I'm happy to return to it. Yes, look, one of the things that we would like to do, if I have the opportunity to lead OPM, is completely relook at the entire talent management process. One of the most critical ones, as you mentioned, is the overall performance review and promotion process. And so it's very clear from my perspective that we want a high-performing, high-accountability organization. I mentioned this in my opening statement, but we should not have a situation where 69% of the workforce is ranked above average. That just kind of defies logic in many respects. So one of the things that I think OPM should do is do a complete review of that, figure out ways in which we can have a system that, again, rewards innovation, rewards good work, but also one in which if we have individuals who unfortunately are not able to perform their functions, managers need the ability to remove those people in a timely manner from their organization.
No, and thank you. I will assume your confirmation and say that I look forward to working with you on that.
Thank you,
Mr. Ueland.
Thank you, Senator. And just very quickly, that's what President Trump expects out of us. To take a look at the rules of the road for the federal workforce, find ways to innovate, create, and ultimately set new norms about high performance and the accountability that comes along with the opportunity and the privilege of federal service. We are all at-will employees. You are at will of the electorate. Everybody behind you, I've served my entire life up here in other roles in the private sector as an at-will employee. It's invigorating. It's exciting. You learn what the expectations are, and you work hard with a high-performing team to deliver results. I'm excited about the President's charge here to rethink, reimagine, and renew for the federal workforce here in the 21st century, and that's my commitment to this committee.
Yes, and I thank you both. And I know that my time has expired. We don't have other members here, so I'm just going to make one final point. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you. So just a final point, because I know I had a colleague the other day that spent 25 hours talking about the federal government on the floor of the Senate. And part of what he said really bothered me, because there were insinuations that there would be cuts to the Social Security Administration, and people wouldn't see delivery and you know, all of this talk. It was talk. But what I wanted to do was stand up on the floor and say, and I know from personal experience, again, because I had to take issue with this, the Social Security Administrative Office in Northwest Iowa had been closed, and the workers were doing remote work for 4 years. COVID? I think not, folks. We're beyond that. 4 years, constituents came to me complaining because they couldn't get their calls returned, they couldn't get emails returned, and they couldn't go to the office and see anyone. These are people seeking disability services. These are elderly. These are people that have lost their spouses and need assistance with Social Security, and they couldn't get their phone calls returned, emails returned, and they couldn't see someone in person. I had to call the Social Security Administrator into my office to answer why these people are not at work and assisting our citizens. So don't tell me that everything has been rolling just so smoothly under this last administration. We need people that care about our constituents. They need to show up to work and do their work. We should reward good employees and get rid of those that truly don't want to work for Americans and only are working for themselves. So I do expect that from both of you, and I know that we will get that from both of you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Ernst. You're almost done. We're saving the best for last. Senator Ernst's story is about outrageous behavior from federal employees and reminds me of my favorite one. This person was second in charge at the EPA in the Obama administration. I can't remember his name. He went to jail eventually, but for about a decade, he was telling his superiors at work, well, you know, I'll be missing a lot of work and I won't be here a lot of times because, you know, I also work for the CIA. And I didn't realize people worked for the EPA and the CIA at the same time, but nobody ever called the CIA to ask him if he worked there. He did this for a decade. In the end, I think he owed over $1 million that he had to pay back in salary, and I think he went to jail, but it went on for a decade. And he just simply told people, but we had a shutdown, and during the shutdown, they actually did some of the things you're supposed to do. They actually looked at his worksheet, and he hadn't been there in 6 months, and they're like, oh yeah, he works for the CIA. Well, has anybody ever called the CIA? They called and they'd never heard of him. So the outrageous stuff goes on, and, you know, I'm glad we're shaking it up. I'm glad we're doing this. But I guess one of the things I wanted to point out is that, you know, Mr. Ueland, you've worked most of your career, if not all your career, for the federal government. So do you have a preconceived notion that federal employees are all bad?
Senator, thanks for the question, and I'm here to assure you I don't work for the CIA. But I'm in my 20s, to reference Senator Moreno a little earlier. No, I don't have a preconceived notion that all federal
And the same
employees are
question for
bad.
Mr. Cooper. Do you have a preconceived notion?
No, I don't. And again, as we've discussed, look, this is exactly why a system of accountability matters. We want the very best people to show up every day and do their best, and we should have an environment that enables that.
But it goes back to the question, the minority made this point that, well, people who are being fired have just been promoted. But if you were running a business, let's say not the government, a business, and it were losing $2 trillion a year, maybe some good people would have to be let go, right? I mean, in order to right the ship, you have to let go some people. So I don't think it's a conviction of you as a person or the Trump administration if some people who got a promotion. Plus, there is a question, were too many people being promoted, or were people being promoted to try to protect them from being fired? But it isn't, I think, a accurate assumption to say, oh, we hate all the federal employees. I'm a federal employee. There are good people who work for the federal government. And but even some good people will have to probably let go in downsizing of things. And, I just think it's important that people not go away with the message that we're all Republicans or against all federal employees. We have many good federal employees here that work for us, and that have worked in government. So I think that's not true. With regard to like the concept of collective bargaining, though, we have at times through our history thought that people who provide like for the military or our security, we won't have collective bargaining there because we can't have soldiers going on strike. We've had the same sort of thought with air traffic controllers, and Reagan fired them famously at one time because he said you can't just have them walk off the job. So while collective bargaining is not something I'm opposed to, in fact, I think there's some areas of our economy I'd like to see more collective bargaining for consumers on drug prices, things like that. There's ways that collectively we can drive prices down or drive wages up, if that may be. But it doesn't mean we need to have collective bargaining everywhere, the right to strike, and you have to be careful. For many, many decades, for most of the history of the country, you didn't have unions in government, and the reasoning was that government was essential. You had to have them, so you can't have government go on strike. You can't have Congress go on strike and not show up. You can't have our employees show up, and so all of our employees, as Mr. Ueland said, are at will. One of the things I've tried to do is see if there are any ways we can nibble around the corners. And I've always thought of this bill as a small bill with large sort of expectations. We call it bonuses for cost cutters. And what we try to do is take the incentives that you have in private business where you get rewarded if your company makes more money. It's hard to tell if the government makes more money, but if you could cut costs, government loses less money, and then reward those people individually. There is a little bit of this, but there isn't quite enough of it. So we have a bill called Bonuses for Cost Cutters to expand it. We've occasionally gotten some bipartisan support, often though the debate runs this way, that they say, well, that's fine, we'll give the bonus to the employee. If you're in charge of a $12 million budget and you save $1 million, we'll give you $10,000. I think that's a great idea, but they want the $1 million to still be spent. And my whole point is, if you save $1 million, let's send it back to the Treasury, which we'll get back into this debate over impoundment. We're not going to solve that today, but ultimately it's going to have to be solved. And in the meantime, as I've told you both privately and everybody who will listen, we hope the administration will send us back a rescission package. It's a special vote. It's a simple majority. Everybody talks about the budget reconciliation, all these things we can do. That's true. But there's also something called rescission that comes out of the Impoundment Act, and it's a simple majority way to cut money. The president is very popular. He won a well-deserved election, and I hope the president will use his political capital to come to us and say, $2 trillion in debt, the way we get rid of it is, why don't you accept this money back, take it back. And once we do, it'll send this message. The public's behind him. The public, frankly, mostly is behind the, not spending $2 million doing sex changes in Guatemala, not spending $3 million on girl-centric climate change, not spending $4 million on social media influencers in Ukraine. The public is with us on this. But I've been advocating to have it sent back, have it sent back through rescission so it's voted on by Congress and it has some permanence.
Senator, can I just quickly respond on rescissions? The director has been very public, the president as well, very clear to us at OMB. We will be sending a rescissions package, at least one, to Congress. We do expect success. We are excited about the partnership, and we're looking forward to the president being able to sign into law actual, provable spending eliminations through the process of rescission.
And we'll end with this. Mr. Kupor, I don't know if you've heard of one of your predecessors. His name was Don Devine, and he was OPM director for Reagan. And he's a friend of mine. He's written several books. One of his books is America's Way Back. I highly recommend it. Sort of the thesis from my point of view is that freedom requires tradition, or another word for tradition is virtue. Washington talked about this, a lot of our founding fathers, and the reason you need virtue and you need some kind of religious foundation or sense of right and wrong is that there aren't enough policemen. We don't think about it. It's like, well, you know, why do people not steal? Because they'll go to jail? Some people don't steal because they'll go to jail, but most of us don't steal because we think it's wrong. But if 98% of us quit believing in right and wrong, there are dangers to that, and it's just the importance, and government can't create that. That's something you accept personally, your religion, your tradition, your faith, right and wrong. Maybe I'm a big fan of Don Devine's, and maybe when you're done, you'll go on to write famous books like Don Devine. But we wish you both, we wish you both success.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The nominees have filed responses to biographical and financial questionnaires, answered pre-hearing questions submitted by the committee, and had their financial statements reviewed by the Office of Government Ethics. Without objection, this information will be made part of the hearing record, with the exception of the financial data which are on file with the committee. The hearing record will remain open until 5 p.m. today for the submission of statements and questions for the record. We are adjourned. Thank you very much.